Hello, all my entrepreneurs and business leaders, and welcome to the Michael Esposito Show, where I interview titans of industry in order to inform, educate, and inspire you to be great. My guest today is an inspiring leader. He's a two-time Emmy Award-nominated director of photography and producer. With a career spanning 20 years, he's produced hundreds of hours of national and globally distributed programming for major broadcasters including BBC, NBC, Universal, and Discovery. He's served as a showrunner and series producer on multiple complex and challenging projects, overseeing multi-million-dollar budgeted productions. He has staffed and led teams filming all over the world in environments ranging from the Arctic Circle to sub-Saharan Africa, producing lifestyle, documentary, entertainment, and commercial content. He's my friend and mentor, I'd say. Please welcome Tom Langan. Welcome, Tom.
Thanks, Michael. Pleasure to be here. Thanks
Tom,
for having me.
It's great having you. I want to share with you that I typically write my own intro for my guests, and I do that by, their bio that they submit to me, and by going to their website and reading it and taking out things and adding things and changing it up. And when I read your bio on your website, I looked at it and I went, I can't change this. I can't change this. It is so well written. You have so many accomplishments that if I took anything out, I felt like I'd be doing you a disservice. So I took another one of my mentors, Skip Weissman, who's a public speaking coach and fellow Toastmaster, had shared with me. He said, when you submit a bio to somebody to read as an introduction, read it just the way they submitted it. Don't change it. Don't alter it. And so I thought about that with you, was to take your bio just the way it is without altering it. So welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
I can't wait to dive into your story. We've known each other for a couple years.
Yep.
We met through networking events and on a casual kind of get to know each other, but I never got to dig into how you got into video and production and becoming a producer, and, as you always correct me, a cinematographer. So let's talk a little bit about that, about your life story, about your journey to entrepreneurship. And one of the things I noticed in your bio that you submitted to me was it happened by accident.
Yeah, 100%.
I don't think anything's an accident.
I completely fell into working in production. It was not by design. So essentially what happened was I was in my senior year in college. I was a psychology major. I had decided not to go to graduate school. And in talking to my parents about what I was going to do after college, because I had decided not to go to graduate school, they said, you have to get a job. And I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was graduating in a couple of months with a bachelor's degree in psychology. There's not a lot of jobs that you can walk in and say, I have a degree in psychology, a bachelor's in psychology, please hire me. Like, that doesn't specifically qualify you for very many jobs, right? And so I was on the phone with a good friend of mine one night in college, like a good friend of mine from high school. I was talking to her, telling her that my parents were starting to get on my case about getting a job. It was March time of my senior year in college. I was graduating in a couple of months, and my parents were really starting to get on my case about getting a job and essentially saying, look, you can come home and live here, but you got to get a job. Like, you're not just going to come back and hang out in our house. You have to get a job. And so I was telling her about this, and she said, just kind of out of nowhere, well, why don't you call my dad? And I was like, what? Why would I call your dad? And she said, well, he's starting a new show. He owned a production company, which I knew. He's starting a new show, and they're going to need production assistants. They're going to need runners, PAs, entry-level folks to fill out the staff on the show. And I'm sure he'll give you a job. I had actually worked for him about the year prior for about 6 weeks, just kind of filling in as a production assistant on another show, on the Judge Mills Lane show, in fact. And so she said, just call my dad. If he's got a PA, a production assistant slot open, he'll hire you for that. it's entry level. You don't need any prior experience. You just need to show up and work hard. And he knows you and trusts you. So give him a call. So I did. So I called him and I told him what was going on, and he said, sure. When do you graduate? And I gave him the date. He said, okay, fine. Talk to my production manager. Transferred me over to the production manager. The production manager said, okay, when can you start? And so 6 days after I graduated from college, I started my first job in production. And the rest is, as they say, history.
I have a few questions for you, some of them regarding your parents first.
Sure.
But first, I just want to help our audience understand what certain things are that you mentioned here, because a lot of them are industry terms. So a runner, PA, and then, of course, we just have to share who Judge Mills Lane is and his history just briefly.
Yeah. So a runner or production assistant, a lot of times, or PA is just short for production assistant. They're essentially interchangeable terms most of the time. And so that person is the gopher, right? It is the entry level job. It's where everybody starts out in production, essentially. And when I started out, what I was doing was running errands, right? Hence the term runner, how that's interchangeable. A lot of what you do is you run errands, and you do all the non-glamorous stuff that has to get done, right? A lot of like logistical work and admin logistics and stuff like that. And so essentially what I was doing was like getting coffee and taking lunch orders and taking, they would hand me something and say, take this over to that office, or take this downtown to the studio, or take this over here, or, run this contract over to the lawyer's office, or whatever it was. So that was being a production assistant. That's what it means.
And I guess you also probably learn a lot in that position because you're being exposed to so much more. You're not just confined to this one space of just, let's say, costumes, and you're in just the costume room and you're just getting costumes for the set and you're only working on set. You're going to different sets, you're going to different offices, you're meeting different people, so you become exposed a lot.
You can, for sure, but I think it's incumbent on the person in that position to actively seek that out. No one's going to hand you that experience, right? You get those opportunities. You have to walk through the door.
I'm happy that you said that, because I didn't know that you were a psychology degree, but from my knowing you over the past couple years, I do always notice that you have you always look at things very differently, and you do jump right into the psychology of things and how somebody's going to interpret something. Is that nothing's ever given when we speak. You always have an analytical way of describing it. So I want to go into psychology with you as well. Judge Mills Lane, does anybody know where he's from?
I mean, I think probably most famously from refereeing, right?
The Mike Tyson fight.
The Mike Tyson fight.
Right?
Wasn't it the Tyson-Holyfield bite fight?
Yep. Yeah. That's how I know him.
The bite fight.
The bite fight. The bite fight. All right, back on track here. You brought up your parents, and you brought something up that was interesting to me, because it's not something that you hear very often. You hear a lot about people saying, I was finished with high school and my parents said I have to go to college. But for you, it was, I was finishing college and they said I have to go to graduate school. So that makes me wonder about your parents, what their backgrounds are like, and what their expectations of you were growing up.
So, yeah, interesting question. I mean, and I didn't necessarily intend to give that impression. They didn't, I think they, on some level, probably expected that I would go to graduate school, but they didn't require it. It wasn't a hard, it wasn't a requirement, right? But my family is very well educated. So in my immediate family, it's just me and my sister and my parents in my immediate family. But in my immediate family, I'm the only one without a postgraduate degree. And in fact, two of the other three people have doctorate level degrees, and one of them is like a handful of credits short of a doctorate. And they all and both of my parents hold multiple degrees in different disciplines. So it was one of those things that I looked at them and I just sort of assumed that they expected me to go to graduate school. I was actually nervous when I decided to not go to graduate school. I was nervous about telling them that I didn't want to go to graduate school. And they said, it's fine. Whatever you want to do, we'll support you, but you're not going to come back here and just live off of us. You got to get a job. If you're not going to go to graduate school, then your job is to get a job. If you were going to graduate school, your job would be to go to graduate school, right? If you're not going to graduate school, your job is to work, to get a job.
I'm going to jump ahead just for a second here because I'm thinking about the business world, the entrepreneurial journey, and two things that I picked up from that right there is they taught you boundaries and expectations, which are, I think, vital to the success of an entrepreneur is to understand our boundaries and to understand what's expected of us. And then the other thing that you talked about, I think on the other side of that, is that sometimes we make assumptions, like you made with your parents, and they're not always true. And I think that holds back a lot of people who want to, when I speak about our business leaders, I'm talking about people in the corporate world and want to go into the C-suite or into C-level and, level up their career, or the entrepreneur who want to take a chance, a risk, and they make assumptions. And
Right.
to just go tell your parents, hey, I don't want to go to grad school.
And often those assumptions, not only do they hold people back from expressing something to somebody else, right? Saying something to somebody else. Often, if you hold back having that conversation, if you move based on those assumptions, that can literally change the course of your life, right? Mm-hmm. If I had assumed that my parents expected me to go to graduate school and not had the courage to have the conversation with them that I was nervous about having, I probably would have gone to graduate school.
Right.
And the trajectory in my life would have been dramatically different.
Yeah. And who's to know what it could have been, right? Like you would have been a psychologist who might not have been happy.
Right.
Or a psychologist making some really cool videos, right?
Yeah, I mean, who knows?
I think that's what it is.
Who knows?
I think you still would have picked up a camera.
Yeah, there's no way to tell, but it would have been different.
Yeah.
For sure. That is for sure.
Yeah, I'm happy you brought that part up. Another thing, you talk about your family having all of these degrees, and I think that also has a parallel to the entrepreneurial world in that you have all these people around you who are accomplished. And I think, again, in the entrepreneurial world, it's another challenge that we have is that we're comparing ourselves a lot of the time to people who are accomplished. We're starting in our journey. So using this parallel of like graduating school, you're starting in your journey. I'm opening up a business, whoever it is out there, right? There is opening up a business. But then we compare ourselves to these people who have had a 10-year career or a 20-year career. And we go, oh man, how am I ever going to get there, right? It's such an interesting thing, right? That you already had that. And then, you were able to find your way, which is huge. So you said that it happened by accident. And being the psychology guy that you are, right? Wouldn't Freud say that there's no accidents? I think Freud would say that, wouldn't he?
I mean, maybe. I'm not. I was never a huge
Freud
fan of
right.
Freudian.
Right. Well, I dipped my toes
analysis.
in Psychology 101 in college because I think that was the fun course that we all took, right? The 101. I want to talk more about psychology, but the reason why I bring that up is because I think it's in your bio somewhere here about you picking up a camera very early on in your life. And I kind of know that about your story just from our conversations. And that's why I don't think it was quite an accident that you fell into it. The phone call that you made, taking that action to make a phone call to work on set, could have been the same phone call that you made to find somebody as an intern at a psychology office or in an administrative building as somebody there. So you made a phone call, you made a decision in that moment to choose the, I think, production world or world that you're in today.
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, 100% agree that I did make choices that put me on that path. I think what happened, I think the fact that, I was just on the phone with a friend, right?
Right, sure.
And I had no idea that her dad was starting up a new show, that his production company was starting a new show, that they were currently staffing up for, that they were going to be looking for people. And so that that was sort of a happy accident, right? I think where it became very intentional was when after that job ended, I continued to work in production. Right. So it was initially, and she literally said to me, this is how much of an accident it was, this friend of mine, she literally said to me, at least it'll give you a job until you figure out what you want to do. Right? That was the conversation we were having, was I was having trouble figuring out what jobs I should even be looking for because I had no idea what I wanted to do.
Right. I bring it up too because I kind of want to go to that feeling that you had. There's two questions about feelings for you. One, just now with when talking with her and finding out about the show. But I really want to go back to the feeling you had because you do talk about it when you got your first camera. Mm-hmm. How old were you? How it was received? What you started using and doing with it is really what I'd like to learn a little bit more about.
Yeah. So I was always interested in photography, right? I always enjoyed photography. I was always interested in it. And I can't actually remember what the cameras, we had these cameras that were like named after the film you put in them. Right. That were like just sort of amateur. Fuji. It was like these little like cartridge cameras. They were like little flat rectangles. Oh, okay. And the film came in like a cartridge. And I'm trying to remember what they were called, but anyway, my sister and I both had those. Somebody gave, I don't know if it was our parents or somebody else gave them to us as gifts when we were kids. And I always loved taking pictures. I used mine all the time. In fact, to the point where like my parents were like, because back in those days, it was not only were you buying the film, but then you were also paying to have the pictures developed. So there were costs associated with every picture.
It wasn't a one-time cost.
It wasn't. It wasn't your phone where you can take 100 pictures and just throw the ones away, delete the ones that you don't want, right? If you take 100 pictures on a film camera, you've just used that film that's going to cost you money to get new film, to have that film processed, whatever. So I used it enough that I remember sort of the film was like rationed to me by my parents, right? But then I got into... when I was in middle school, my middle school started a photography club, and you could sort of sign up for like during a free period. You could go and take like an elective photography class, and I really wanted to do it, but you had to have a camera. They didn't supply cameras. You had to have a 35 millimeter film camera, and I didn't have one. And so I asked my parents for one for my birthday, and so when I was 13. They gave me a 35 millimeter film camera. It was a Pentax. I think it was a K1000. It was stolen a few years later. I left it somewhere. I think I accidentally left it like on a bench or something at school. And when I went back to get it, it was gone. And I never saw it again. But I'm pretty sure it was a Pentax K1000. And that was that was the first camera I owned.
So do you ever leave equipment laying around anymore?
Well, not no. No, this is a very very different different approach.
Yes. Yeah. You took one lesson to learn it.
Well, yeah, and the equipment that we're talking about is
way more
dramatically more expensive than that camera was.
So now your 13th birthday comes. You know, these guys get the cake out, sing happy birthday, blow the candles out, presents come out. You unwrap this camera. What was that feeling like for you?
It was really exciting because it was an opportunity to get to do something that I had never done before but knew I wanted to do, right? And that was to sort of create imagery wholesale, like from whole cloth, right? So like starting from scratch, buying the film, putting the film in the camera, setting up shots, taking pictures, and then developing the film, printing the pictures myself. So it was a full stop, full range of process. So
you were setting up shots back then. So like, with a tripod and all that stuff.
Oh yeah.
Do you remember any of the shots that you took? Or
I've shared some on Instagram and stuff. Yeah, one of the ones that I've shared on Instagram is a cool picture that I took of a buddy of mine agreed to be in the shot. It was one I did when I was in high school, and we used the headlights from my car to light the subject. So his family had an antique Dodge convertible, and we took his dad's trench coat and like a fedora and found a couple of like toy guns, and he's standing in front of the Dodge, kind of leaning back against the hood with his hands crossed at his waist with what looks like a revolver in each hand, and the fedora kind of pulled down so you can't see his face. He's like looking down at the ground. And and I lit it entirely with headlights from my car. And it was like a long exposure, nighttime kind of shot. So I did a whole bunch of stuff like that over time.
Again, so cool, and it just speaks to ingenuity, it speaks to creativity, and that, again, bringing it back to today and our entrepreneurs and business leaders out there is that while having fancy equipment, while having expensive tools, whatever you want to call them in your industry are, right, is great to have and makes life easier, you can find other ways to do things. And I'm sure if we look at that picture, of which, like you said, you shared, and if we see it, it probably looks like a picture that somebody tries to do today, all done up, and then puts all the filters on it to make it look old school. But meanwhile, it's just like perfectly done old school, right?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, it's on my Instagram. If you go to my Instagram, you'll see that picture.
What's your Instagram, just in case anybody's paying attention?
Yeah, if anybody wants to check out any of my social media, it's if they just search at Talex Media LLC. That's the handle I use. All of my social media has the same handle. So
yeah. So while you're listening to this, you can be playing with your social media and checking out what Tom has on there. I think that's such a cool story because again, it goes back to this where you are today in this journey. Is that I think like for me, for instance, so for me, I always wanted to be an actor growing up. So I got to go on set. So my question to you doesn't really relate to our audience here, but it was more of like how to feel to go on set. And I don't think it relates to you either because like for you, that wasn't a dream or a fantasy either. But for me, I remember my first time on set, I was just like awestruck. I mean, I had a crazy experience on set. I just met like amazing people. I'll share it real quick. I've shared it briefly. I've shared it with other people before, but briefly, this was my experience. I'm going to just go through it 1, 2, 3 for you. My very first day on set, I get there. I meet a guy named Johnny. He just keeps telling me his name's Johnny. I'm like, hey, Johnny. He's like, call me Johnny. I'm like, all right, whatever. This guy starts helping me with everything. And again, I'm going through this very quickly. They come in the room. They say, we need detectives. I perk up because I was there as a detective role. This is on a show called Shades of Blue. And they say, we need detectives. So I perk up. They see me. They get me on set, right? So now I'm walking on set and I'm like, this is amazing, right? The lights and you know what it looks like and everything. And as I'm walking on set, Ryan Seacrest is standing there. So this is like already entering like dream phase, right? Like, Michael, are we in a dream or is this real? This is real, right? Like I have the date documented.
Pinching yourself.
Right?
Yeah.
So Ryan Seacrest is there. He's talking with another guy. They're in a suit. I remember we make a right turn on set. We see all like the sticks, like all the woodwork and everything from behind the set. And then we enter what is exactly a police department. Like this is a police department, like the hardwood, that oak looking, like that dark wood. So we enter the police department and right across the way is Ray Liotta doing lines. Film lines in the corner there, like rehearsing his lines. And I'm like, oh my God. Now the guy I'm standing next to is my partner, right, quote unquote. And he's like literally grabbing me. And I'm going, dude, I don't want to get thrown off set. Stop grabbing me, like just chill. So I'm acting like this is my 100th time and this is like his 100th time. But to him, this is an experience that I don't think many actors or at least background actors like I was go through where they're meeting all of these like famous people in one shot. And I'll also add, by the way, Peter Weller, RoboCop, was the director on set. So he's yelling at everybody. So anyway, so the AD has us do some lines, some walking through lines kind of thing, right? And he comes up to me and he says, hey, I'm going to have you trail Ray. And I said, okay, cool. About 10 minutes later, Jennifer Lopez walks through the door. So I'm telling you, this part was dream phase, was like the doors open. And I swear, I feel like a ray of sunshine came in and butterflies started. There was smoke, like, all the music came on. But I remember she walked through the door and she goes, are you ready for some real acting? Like she just has this like confidence and charisma to her. And I know that this story, I don't know if this helps our entrepreneurs out there, but I'm just going to finish it up for you. So anyway, so the AD comes back up to me and he goes, hey, listen, actually, Ray and Jennifer are going to be talking. And, of course, in your mind, you're going, all right, then I'm out of the scene, whatever. And he goes, so they're going to be talking. And what I want you to do is actually, you're going to trail the two of them. And I'm like, oh, I get to trail Ray Liotta and Jennifer Lopez. So I'm literally right behind them. Walk up to our spot and it cuts, right? We cut for break, whatever. So Ray Liotta, Peter Weller, Jennifer Lopez and I are standing at a desk that I'm supposed to be there. I'm just waiting. They're talking, chit-chatting. And I remember vividly Jennifer and Peter Weller are having a conversation about something that I didn't agree with. I'm not going to share what it was, but I just didn't agree with her perspective on the conversation. And she turns to me and goes, right? And I look at her and I go, yeah. I was like, I am not like disagreeing with Jennifer Lopez on set. So anyway, long story short, we wrap up the day there, get back to Holding, which is where they keep all the actors. Yep. And this guy, Johnny's like, how was it? I walk in there, my face is lit. Like, I'm just like, I just met, Ryan Seacrest, Jennifer Lopez, Ray Liotta, Peter Weller. I'm like, my head is about to explode. And I was on camera, which is another big thing. Like, typically, you get to background, you get into Holding, and you never get on set, which I experienced down the road. Anyway, at the end of the day, this guy, Johnny, says, hey, listen, why don't you look me up and stay in touch with me? Which, by the way, to his credit, he stayed in touch with me for my journey as an actor. Turns out he was Goomba Johnny, which if you don't know, growing up I listened to Z100 and Goomba Johnny was this huge radio personality. And I remember I called my sister that night. I was just like, I'm friends with Goomba Johnny. It was like the coolest experience. So that was my acting experience. I know we kind of got off track here, but I couldn't help but share that when you talked about going on set. So I know that wasn't what you were expecting.
Well, so do you want to hear the story of the first time I was on set?
I would love to.
Okay. So, because it's kind of a whopper, too.
Awesome.
So, I was telling you about this convertible, this picture that I took with this buddy of mine, right? Using his family's convertible at his family's place. Well, sometime around then, I think when we were like maybe 15 or 16, it might have been before I could drive. I don't remember what year it was, but I think we were like 14 or 15, somewhere in that neighborhood. And all of a sudden he was like, dude, you're not going to believe what's happening. And I was like, what? And he's like, they're using my house for a movie. And I was like, get out of here. He was like, yeah, they're using my house for a movie. I was like, what movie? And he was like, it's called The Quiz Show. And I was like, okay. Yeah, so Robert Redford directed this film called The Quiz Show, and it was about the sort of big quiz show scandal in the 50s. Robert Redford was directing the filming of these scenes for The Quiz Show, so got to meet Robert Redford, which was really cool. He's very, very nice. He let me stand behind him and watch over his shoulder on the director's monitors in Video Village while they were shooting, which was super cool. And we didn't know who he was at the time, but one of the stars of the film, was very, very nice and actually had lunch a couple of days. They had like a whole tent set up for catering. And he came over and sat with my buddy and I and had lunch with us a couple of days out of the shoot. And we knew his name. We knew he was a star in the movie, but he wasn't known in the U.S. at that point. And it was Ralph Fiennes. So he sat and had lunch with us. He's since gone on to become incredibly famous, and including playing Voldemort in all the Harry Potter films. Right, that's Ralph Fiennes. And so he sat and had lunch with us when we were like 14 years old while they were filming The Quiz Show at my buddy's house, just hanging out. So that was the first time I was ever on a set. It wasn't a sound stage like you're describing. It was a location set at my friend's house, my best friend's house. He and I have known each other since we were 2 years old. In fact, most of the name of my company is actually his name. So that was the first time I was ever on set, was at his house.
That's pretty cool. And where is that location? Like, you don't have to get the address, obviously, but
Westchester, it's in Westchester.
Westchester, that's what I thought. Yeah. Okay, cool. You just mentioned something that I didn't know about. So Talex Media, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Is named after him or in his name?
Well, so basically, the story of how we came up with how Talex came to be, the name anyway, is really straightforward. So this buddy of mine and I grew up together. We've known each other since we were like 2 years old. And we had an idea for a business this was like...
How old were you guys?
When we had the idea for the business? Yeah. It was in 2006. So what would that make me?
Well, not a big thing.
Yeah, whatever. Anyway, I was in my 20s. We were in our 20s.
Yeah.
It was 2006. We were in our 20s. We had an idea for a business, and didn't know what we like. Didn't know how to get it off the ground, basically, right? But we did the most important thing, and that was we came up with a name for the company. And then about a year later, I was doing work for MTV, and I needed to form an LLC as a pass-through for this contract work that I was doing for some very uninteresting tax reasons. And I called him up and I said, hey, I really like the name we came up with. I know we never did anything with it. Do you mind if I use it? And because I wanted to make sure he was good with it, because it was something we came up with together. And he said, yeah, man, I don't care. I'm not going to do anything with it. Go for it. It's all yours. And that's the name we came up with for that company was Talex. And as you know, my name is Tom and his name is Alex.
Ah, thank you. Thank you for piecing that together for me. It's funny, like I said to you, I usually do research on my guest. And for you, I was just like typing in the name of your web address to just pull up everything. And I was like, I wonder what a Talex is. That's exactly what went through my mind, is what is a Talex? I know we kind of went down story time, which I knew that we would, which is wonderful because of our relationship. And you're definitely in an industry that I love. Love in the sense of like just something I grew up wanting to be a part of, and I feel like I'm kind of a part of it with the podcast, with the videos and everything I do. But anyway, what I want to bring up here is more about some of the things you just said in some of those stories and figuring it out. And one of them was, you didn't say this, but you acted in integrity, which I just think about our audience. I think about some of the decisions that they have to make. And sometimes it's a lot easier to just, you know what, I came up with it with my buddy, he's not going to care, I'm just going to write the name down on the agreement and not give him a call. And it's a lot easier sometimes to just plow through and just go with our day and not have to deal with what somebody else might think or say or whatever it is. And sometimes that's good. But in situations like this, where you had come up with an agreement with a friend, you acted in integrity, and I would love for you to just elaborate briefly or lengthily, however you decide to do it, on what integrity means to you and how you identify it today in your life, and how important it is in the entrepreneurial and business world.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is generally, I'll kind of stick to my lane a little bit on this, but I think in the way that businesses communicate with their audiences, with the communities that they seek to serve, with their current and potential customers and clients, there is not always a lot of integrity. And I think that's because, especially I see this less so in larger scale businesses, but I see it particularly in smaller or mid-sized businesses. There seems to be this notion, which I think is completely misguided, but there seems to be this notion that the only way to get ahead is by taking away from someone else. And so I think that drives a lot of decision making for a lot of people in business, that they believe for some reason, and I don't even know where this belief comes from, but they believe for some reason that they have to, in order to grow their business, they have to take away from someone else, right? So it's not about expanding the market, it's about taking someone else's market share, right? And I think that drives a lot of decision-making that we see in businesses and the way businesses interact with their communities is they're more focused on taking than they are on giving.
I think that to me, and again, like you said, staying in lanes, but I go through a lot of coaching, and we speak about this concept a lot. You know Merritt very well. We speak about this.
I actually saw her last night.
Of course, yeah. She's a very popular lady. I think we would speak about the scarcity mindset, in that if I don't take away from you, there's not enough to go around, and therefore the only way that I can have my market share, to your point, is by taking from you. And that's a scarcity mindset, is that you don't think that there's enough to go around. I think that that's somewhat shifting these days, right? Like, isn't that an old school way of thinking of like cutthroat business and taking?
Yeah, I mean, it is. It 100%
Hopefully.
is an old. It should be an old modality that is hopefully going extinct, but it's still around right now for sure. And I think it's all. It's just the wrong way to approach things, right? And the reason I think that is because if you don't believe, if you create a product or a service as part of your business, and immediately from jump, you're not sure that there's enough market share for that product or service to be successful, the problem is not your competitors, you're the problem. The problem is that you haven't created a product or service that is good enough, that enough people need, that it will create its own market, right? That there is already an existing market for it. So you're the problem, not the other competitors in the space or the other people with similar products, right? But a lot of people say, this is what I want to do, right? And they create a product or service and they think that they've got the best product or service, and they see the only way to get ahead is to take away from other people, right? Is to steal that market share from other businesses. And it's a terrible way to live.
I agree with that 100%. I started my company, which many of you know, my insurance company, and I always speak about that. Is that I speak about that with my employees, with my business partners. I was just speaking about it yesterday with a copywriter, in that I don't view any other insurance agency as competition. And I don't mean it in an egotistical way. I don't mean it in a, we're so good, there's no competition out there that can match us. I mean it in the sense of what you're talking about, is that we're all together. In fact, to that point, I actually did a fundraiser in collaboration with another insurance company yesterday. And so it's because I know that he offers a certain service to his clients and a certain way of servicing them, and I offer a different type of service. And you may like the way he operates. Wonderful for you. I know that the way that I operate and in our company and how we do it, we're going to also attract the people that we want. And they're different than the ones that he wants. And as you said, there's plenty out there. And the other thing I think of as well along the lines of this is integrations, evolution, in that, again, back to your point of, if you're entering a space or creating a product, and while it might be similar to your, let's say, quote unquote competitors, because people view people as competitors, fair enough, right? It might be the same, whatever. But the only company that's actually going to probably move forward and win market share, or whatever it is that we're calling it in this conversation here, is the company that evolves, is the company that grows, is the company that changes, is the company that adds more value. Like, you can add value today and bring in customers. That's wonderful. But the only way that you're going to get more customers on top of that, or clients, whatever you call them, is by adding more value and adding more services and adding more things. Very similar to you, Tom. I mean, when I first met you, I knew somewhat of what you did. And at that time, it was good enough for what it was. I don't want to misspeak this one, I'm just being very vague. But then today, you bring on this whole other concept of legendeering and what that is. And it not just being a product, but as you had said, more of a philosophy.
It's a strategy,
It's a
right?
strategy.
Yeah.
So it's that you're constantly, as an entrepreneur, evolving. And this comes out of the conversation of first acting in your integrity and doing the right thing from the very beginning, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, and I think I'll give you a clear example of how doing what you're talking about, that sort of acting in integrity, is actually a really good business strategy, right? So I had lunch yesterday with somebody in my network who's also in the insurance agent industry, who you know, Rob Bowen, right?
That's who I partnered with for the Suit Drive.
Yeah, great guy.
Yeah.
Right? Fantastic guy.
And he's been on the show.
Yeah, super good guy. He and I had lunch yesterday, and he was telling me about how he works with some of his referral partners. And the best referral partners he has are other insurance agency owners, right? Because not every insurance agency supplies the same services or the same products, right? And so he has friends in the industry who know what he does, who like working with him, who trust that when they refer a client, over to him for a line that he can write that they don't write, that it'll get done and it'll get handled well and they'll get a good deal on it, right? So and then they refer people back to him, and he's had people come, referrals come from other insurance agents.
I'm one of them.
Right, there you go.
Yep.
So he's had referrals come from other insurance agents, and then had that client turn to them and say, well, so what can you do for me on this policy, right? And he turned around and said, no, that's the policy you have with my colleague. You got to talk to them first, right? Like, I'm going to call them. I'm going to call who holds that policy currently, and I'm going to ask them about that inquiry before I do anything, before I write a quote, before I even look into it. The first thing I'm going to do is pick up the phone, call my colleague and say, hey, they asked me about this. What, are you okay with me looking into it, right? I'm going to ask how they feel about it first. And he's had clients turn around and go, oh, no, don't call him. And he's like, no, I'm going to call them because that's the way I do business.
And something else that you mentioned in there that you've spoken with me about on multiple occasions, which is the client experience. Mm-hmm. Because in the end, it's about the client. It's about the end user. And a perfect example of that, whether you like or dislike this company, is Amazon. Amazon was doing well, but realized that their end user was not buying as much because of returns, because of shipping times. And they figured out a way to fix that and make it easier for the end user. It cost Amazon a lot of money at first. It was an expensive thing to do for them. But when they invested in that mechanism by creating that for the client and being able to make it easier for them to return and ship and everything, well, then it expanded their business. So acting in your integrity, I mean, they always speak about the ultimate client experience. You speak about that as well, in your own words.
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, I think what it's really about is the relationship, right? And I think that's what Rob was getting to with that description he gave me, is that ultimately it's about maintaining and fostering the relationship.
Right.
For him, that referral partner is a relationship he values, and he's not going to throw that away for one policy.
That's right.
Right? Because in the long run, not only is he talking about somebody who he values as a person, as an individual, and as a colleague, but he's also talking about a business relationship, right? Yeah. And one that over time will prove far more valuable for him as a business owner to maintain than it would be to write that one policy.
That 100%.
Right? So don't be penny wise and pound foolish.
Right. And I love that you use the word relationship. We can do a whole other half hour about relationship, but you have some really cool things in your bio that I would like to get to about you, because there's some really cool stuff that I think our audience would enjoy. They might not learn anything from it, although I know that they will, but I really just want to hear some cool stories from Tom.
Sure.
Sorry. But before we do that, I do think that there is a little a piece here that I want to share with everybody, and if you want to just jump in here, Tom, is what was important when you got that contract with MTV was that you created a corporation. It was
an LLC.
An LLC, you did,
yeah.
Okay. And I think it's important that our entrepreneurs out there understand the importance of that, because there's a lot of entrepreneurs that start a business with just a DBA or just put a name on a piece of paper and think that they have a business. And they do have a business. I don't want to discredit them or take that away, but I want to protect them in this conversation. And so can you just share a little bit about creating that, just briefly?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it really, what it came down to was, at the time I was working as an independent contractor. That's what most of my career in television was. I worked as an independent contractor. That's how the industry sort of works. So it made sense for me to form an LLC so that I had a pass-through organization to sort of separate my business income from my personal finances. And that's really what it was about, was just to sort of create that layer of separation where there was a business entity that was contracted with another business entity. It wasn't an individual, invoicing a business entity.
Yeah, and I think so, to kind of just put a pin in that one. There's tax implications, there's financial implications, there's also liability. There's liability implications, which I know very well on the insurance side. So that's where I just want to share that with our audience here, is that's part of the importance, is like, yeah, as soon as you put pen to paper and you start writing your names down or your idea down, you have a business, fair enough, but protect yourself.
100%. And it's not expensive. Right. Generally speaking.
Yeah, you can do it yourself.
It's not expensive. And you can even do it through, there are some online legal services that, will help you set up an LLC for a couple $100, right? So if you're starting a business, a couple $100 should not be a determining factor in whether or not you create a business entity. It makes a ton of sense to do. The other thing I would encourage people to do is, when you're creating a business, do not resist the urge to name it after yourself, right? If you have ambitions of growing a business.
Hashtag the Michael Esposito show.
No, but this isn't a business, right? This isn't a business. But your insurance agency is not called Michael Esposito Insurance, right? Or Esposito Insurance, or it doesn't have your name in it.
No, my daughter's name's
right.
Yes,
but a contraction of them,
right?
Not even either one of their whole names, right?
DenTen.
Yeah. So my point is, and Talex is a contraction of two people's names.
Wow, right.
So it's totally fine. Like I made a different word with two names. You made a different word with two names.
Yeah.
Totally works.
Cool.
The reason I encourage people to do that is, if you have ambitions of growing and scaling your business down the line, right? Resist the urge to name it after yourself, because that can be a limiting factor in your growth. Especially in my field, right? If in the local business economy, right, in the Hudson Valley where I operate now, if I were called Tom Langan Video Production, right, the assumption would always be,
weddings,
in perpetuity, that I am a one-man band and that I show up with a camera and I say, "What do you want me to point this thing at?" Right? That's the assumption when you hear a name like that, right? So don't create opportunity for people to make that assumption about your business. Name your business. It can be something that means something to you. It can be like DenTen does for you, right? Or like Talex does for me. But it doesn't. I would encourage people to steer clear of naming their business after themselves, unless they already have a presence, right, or a following, or an audience that they're bringing into the business, and it makes sense to keep themselves as the brand. But if you ever want to have a point where you can turn around and your business can live on beyond you, it's a good idea to not name it after you.
I think it's an interesting perspective. I know that, just to give a little, I guess, contrast to that, is there are definitely businesses out there. So I don't think that you're saying this is as a rule, but there's definitely businesses out there that are named after someone and have succeeded and grown tremendously and wildly successful. Speaking about expanding outside of the Hudson Valley, Tom, you've taken some pretty cool trips. Arctic Circle and Sub-Saharan Africa. So obviously those aren't just like going to France. Nothing wrong with going to France. France is a cool place, right? But those are definitely places that, JetBlue isn't just running a quick special on. So tell us a little bit about that story, because you worked with some pretty cool BBC, NBC, some pretty cool background there on production companies. I'd love to hear a little bit of some story here of
Sure.
This.
So I went the Sub-Saharan Africa I did a shoot in Nairobi, Kenya years ago.
So what was that
like? It was amazing. It was it wasn't, the subject material was actually like very sort of pedestrian for the shoot. It wasn't the shoot itself. It was a good gig. I enjoyed working on that show.
How'd you get yourself involved in that gig?
Well, so it was House Hunters International.
Okay.
Right. And I got involved in it through networking, and that's what I did. I was directing television shows at the time, and so I went and directed a bunch of episodes of House Hunters International all over the world.
Okay.
So the content was relatively pedestrian, pretty straightforward real estate, a real estate show, but but we, it meant you got to travel all over the world, so it was pretty fun. And yeah, so we went out there was a huge national park just outside of Nairobi. I don't remember what our flight route was. I think it was only like 2 or 3 flights. It wasn't that crazy to get there. But I remember we went out on we had a day off, and we went out on a little sort of driving safari tour in one of the national parks that was right outside of Nairobi, and that was really cool. And they had a van with like no roof, so you could as you were driving along, you could like stand up and look out of the van, and we saw a bunch of wildlife.
No seatbelt laws.
No, well, we weren't going very fast either. But saw a bunch of giraffe, saw some elephants, saw some rhinos.
What was that like, seeing
water
those animals in
buffaloes
real life?
It was pretty cool. Giraffes,
Massive.
we got to get. They had some giraffe. They had like a giraffe house, where they did they had some breeding programs and stuff that they were involved in at that park, and so we also got to go and feed giraffe, like a few giraffes. Right. I think that's right. Giraffes. That's the right way to say it. I don't know.
I don't know.
I think that's the plural of giraffe. If it's not, let us know. Write in. Leave a comment.
I read Jeffrey the Giraffe to my daughters.
Yeah, there you go.
And he could dance. So
there you go. Yeah, these didn't dance, but they have. I don't know if you know, but giraffes have very long, purple, black purple tongues.
No.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and
Did you get a picture of
their
it?
tongues are very strong. I don't know if I might somewhere.
I didn't know their tongues were strong.
Their tongues are very strong because what they do is they reach with their tongues and they wrap their tongues around a branch, and that's how they strip the leaves off of a branch.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you ever watch them eat, they reach out with their tongues, grab the branch, and pull the branch into their mouth with their tongues. Anyway, so they have these long, very strong tongues. But they and they're very dexterous with them. But they'll take they would take feed right out of your hand, with their tongues, and their lips. So they would use their tongue against their lip to pick things up out of your hand. And there was a thing where you could. I didn't do this, but there was a thing where you could take one of the food pellets and hold it in your teeth, and they would take it out of your mouth.
Right.
Which I saw people do while we were there, but I did not do that.
French kissing a giraffe.
Yeah. And
interesting.
And then I also, while I was in Nairobi, I got to pet a cheetah.
Oh.
Which, when I say I got to pet a cheetah, that was not an officially sanctioned activity.
Okay.
So one of the guys who was on the shoot, one of the crew guys that was on the shoot with me, and I went to, they had a zoo that was next to that park, or near that park, that was specifically for rehabilitating animals, right? So it wasn't, they didn't do captive breeding programs or anything like that. It was all wild animals that had been injured that couldn't survive in the wild. So it was a sanctuary kind of place, more so than your traditional zoo, sure. Right? So we went in and we were hanging around, and I was we were in where the cheetah exhibit was, and they have as in they do if you've been to the zoo, and they have the big cats, and they've got the big walls of glass, so you can see the big cats kind of up close. And I was trying to get a picture of one of the cheetahs through the glass, but there were a ton of reflections, and I didn't have a polarizing filter on me, and it was a whole thing. And so I couldn't really get a good picture. And there was one of the zookeepers was standing in the back of the room. And I just kind of hear this voice go, "Would you like to get closer?" And I was like, huh? And I sort of turned around and look, and there's this guy in a zoo uniform or a sanctuary uniform, standing in the sort of back of this room, this open air kind of room or whatever. There was a roof over it. It was kind of dark in the corner. And he was in I think it was a dark green, if I remember correctly. It was a dark green uniform, and he kind of blended into the shadows a little bit. And so you could see the silhouette. It was very it was kind of crazy. But I turned around. I was like, "I'm sorry," and he goes, "Would you like to get closer?" And I was like, "Yeah, is there a place where we can see over the fence or something?" And he was like, "Oh, we can get closer than that." And I looked at the guy that I was with, and I was like, "What is happening?" And he's like, "I think they're offering to take us in there. And I was like, okay. I was like, well, let's see where this goes. Like, let's play this out a little bit. So I was like, okay, how close are we talking? And he was like, you can touch them.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, that's closer than I thought.
Right.
We were talking. Interesting. I was like, so how do we do that? And he's like, come back in half an hour. And I was like, okay. And he's like, and bring, I forget how much it was. It worked out to, I forget the currency in Kenya. But basically what he asked for was the equivalent of like $15 or something like that. It was not very much money. Right. In US
Buy
dollars.
Lunch, pretty much.
Yeah, well, and he the way he said it was, and bring a donation of, and he like named the amount. And then we did like the quick conversion, and I was like, oh, that's like $15. Okay, that's not a lot of money. So we went on about,
and even so, by the way, I mean, if you would have said $100, I would have been like, cool, like that's still pretty cool.
Yeah. So we went on about like walking through the sanctuary, and went back a half an hour later, and he met us, and he was like, do you have your donations? And we were like, yes, we do. And we gave him our donations. And he was like, okay, follow me. And he like takes us around and like through a gate that like people who are visiting the sanctuary are not supposed to go through, the authorized access only gate. And then through a couple more gates, and then we get to the entry of the enclosure, and there's like 3 other guys there from the sanctuary, and like the keepers. And he says, okay, so we're gonna go in, and the cheetah that you're gonna get to pet is one that was hand raised by this keeper here, the guy who was like right there. Mm-hmm. And he was like, so the cheetah is very calm. It's very used to being around people. It's not dangerous. But do not make any sudden movements. Just be calm, move slowly, and everything is going to be fine.
And then a mosquito lands on your shoulder.
Right. And so we were like, okay. And I very specifically remember exchanging a look with the guy that I was with, sort of being like, should we be doing this? And
it's going to be a much different documentary.
We both just kind of like looked at each other, and we're just sort of like shrugged our shoulders, just like, all right, it's kind of like too late to back out now. And so I wasn't thinking like, oh, I could totally like kick this cheetah's ass. But I was like, I think I could like keep its mouth away from anything important for long enough for the keepers to like help me out.
Right.
So I was looking at it going, I think worst case I'm going to get like maybe a bad bite on like my forearm or something. I was like, but I think otherwise I'm going to be okay. That was actually going through my head. I was like, I think I can minimize it if something goes wrong.
You hope, right? I was going to ask you about the size, because I know in pictures, like their heads look really small actually in comparison to their bodies. I think
it weighed, he told us what it weighed.
100 and something pounds, right?
No, not even.
Not even?
No, yeah, no, way less than that.
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
Yeah, it was like
then.
50, 55 pounds, something like that.
Wow.
They're very, very, they're like built like, I mean, obviously we all know how fast cheetahs are, right? Because we all, as kids,
80 miles an hour.
learned that they're like the fastest land animal, right?
For brief periods of time.
Yeah, for very brief periods of time. They can sprint in a straight line at like upwards of 70 miles an hour, but not for very long. But so they're built like greyhounds, right? If you've ever seen like a greyhound in person and how like narrow and long and thin they are, they're
sense.
Kind of like that. Like that's the nearest sort of like analogy that I think a lot of people are can relate to. So they're very kind of, and like greyhounds are kind of big, but they don't actually weigh all that much, right? Like even a big greyhound will weigh maybe 60 pounds. Or 65 pounds. So like they're not, it's similar kind of thing. I think it only weighed between 50 and 60 pounds.
But I'm sure they could do some damage.
Oh, for sure. I mean, its canine teeth were like 3 inches long.
On the damage side, I think, going back to the whole entrepreneurial journey and even like our business leaders out there who, you're kind of taking a chance, when you go out there and you're trying to start your own business. And you're taking a chance when you're looking for the promotion or trying to get into the C-suite. And that moment that you just described of that decision-making, very quick decision-making, because what you just described about going into the enclosure, and then sitting down with the cheetah, it's a matter of seconds, maybe minutes, right? Where you started making very quick decisions. And I think that that's so important to our audience here, is that sometimes you have to make a decision, and it has to be fairly quickly. But that comes from experience. It comes from a little bit of background knowledge, but you have to make a decision, and it has to happen pretty quickly. Yeah. Because if you don't make that decision that quick, the gate closes and you don't get to take the picture with the cheetah. And in very similar ways, the door closes, you don't get that promotion, or you don't get to be able to start that business. And so I think that decision-making process that you described there is you analyzed between what are the pros and cons, what's the benefit out of this, what am I going to get out of this? And I think part of what you shared there is you're going to get a life experience. Mm-hmm. Like, that's a life experience. I shared a story about meeting J-Lo and everything. Cool, right? But when you told me you got to pet a cheetah, it was like, all right, stop everything. Hold on, make sure everything's recording. Let's hear the story about petting a cheetah. This is a life experience. So very quickly, you start weighing out your pros and then your cons of like, I got a job to keep. I could get my arm bit off. But you realize that it was much more important. The life experience, that moment will live forever. That job, you can get more jobs.
Yeah, well, and it was very unlikely. Right, that was the worst case scenario, was that I was going to get bitten by this cheetah.
But you're making that decision.
Right, and it was unlikely. There's always a worst case scenario.
Right.
There's, in everything that we do, in every day of our lives, there's always a worst case scenario. And sometimes you have to look at that worst case scenario and accept it and just go pet the cheetah.
I love that. Go pet the cheetah. That's a really good one. We really didn't get to get into too much, and it's not the intention of the show, on your new strategy.
Right, on legendeering.
And legendeering.
Yeah.
But what I would like to share with our audience here is that Tom and I are actually working on a project together.
Yep.
And part of that project includes a live show. And I believe that this episode will air before Tom's live show comes about. So I'm going to put I've never done this before, a little promotion in here.
Cool.
Of the live show, an event that we're doing. So we're doing a series of live shows at the DenTen Theater in New Paltz every first Wednesday of the month at 6 o'clock. We're not scheduled yet with Tom, but he's going to be on that calendar. And now that I'm saying this live here to all of you, we're going to make sure that this show drops before his live interview. So if you want, make sure to stay in touch with Tom and myself, stay on our socials to find out when Tom's going to be on the live show, and make sure to get tickets to that event. Because what you're going to get to learn about that event, we're going to preface right now, is more about his legendeering program, more about some of his strategies that can help you as business owners, that can help you as entrepreneurs implement in your business today, or have him help you implement in your business today. But like I said, and Tom, you can share a little bit more about this legendeering program and how it'll help business owners today.
Sure. I mean, I think, so this is something that is very common for anybody who's done any public speaking. It's an approach that is very common, or a thing that's often talked about in speaking circles, right? And that is that it's always about the audience and it's never about you, right? And I think Skip would probably back me up on that, right? That it's always about the audience. You are there for the audience. You are there to deliver for the audience. You are not there for yourself, right? And I think, so what I've done with legendeering is essentially adopt that philosophy into a strategy for content creation.
So true. Simon Sinek has taught me that, in that you go up there to give. And I, part of my public speaking coaching, I'm in Toastmasters, and whenever I'm helping newer speakers or speakers who are nervous, I always go back to that. If you get on stage, if you're giving a performance and you're nervous, if you just think about giving and just going up there like, hey, what am I up here to do? Yeah, I'm up here, I'm giving a performance, I'm giving a speech and all that other stuff. All right, put all that aside. What is my purpose? Why am I here today at this conference, at this event, at whatever it is? I'm here to give.
I'm here to help.
I'm here to help. And Simon Sinek says here to give, right? Or help, however you put it, right? Once you put that in your mindset and you start going out there to give, everything comes naturally after that. Sure. Maybe you stumble on, your bullet points that you wanted to share, or you stumble on the story you wanted to share, or the script that you might have had, which we can talk about that another time.
Mm-hmm.
The point is that now you're giving, and regardless of how it comes out, I'm going to use a Maya Angelou quote, right? Which is, it's not about what you say, it's about how you say it. It's not about what you did to the audience, about how they felt. I'm butchering it a little bit, but it's all about the feeling is really what we're getting at here.
100%.
And once you're going out there to give, that's it. That's the feeling, right?
Yeah, and I try to adopt a philosophy like that in everything that I do in business and kind of more broadly in life, that I always try to lead with value.
I was going to bring that up for you. I love that. Please.
And I use that and I would encourage, if anybody wants to steal this, like, please, because I think more people leading with value can only be a good thing, right? But I even use it in my most basic communications with people, when I connect with people, right? When I start to develop relationships and when I network, and when I have friends or colleagues or people in my network introduce me to someone, the thing I say when they make that introduction is, first of all, nice to meet you, right? Often this is by email or some other, something like that. But I'll often say, nice to meet you. And the next thing I will say is, if you're open, I would love to set up a time to learn more about you, your business, and how I can add value for you and for your customers, right? And then I give them a link to set up time with me.
Yeah.
And that's it, right? I know that if I set up the relationship on that foundation, they're going to ask me about my business, right? They're going to ask me, but they're going to do that in reciprocation for me asking them first, right? And that's the way it should be, I think, and that's how. And I don't know, I don't have the name handy for attribution on this idea, right? But it was something that a friend of mine, Chris Worth, shared with me from a book that he was reading. The author was talking about creating give relationships instead of give and take relationships.
Stephen Covey, maybe?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I honestly,
I
have no idea. I have no idea who it was off the top of my head. But so you could say 100 names, I probably would recognize it.
We'll just name a bunch of good books.
Yeah. But anyway, it was about establishing give relationships instead of give and take, right? And the idea is that ultimately, if you lead with value, the value will be returned to you. And do you want me to hit on the psychology of that, like why that works?
Oh my God! Finally, back to psych.
Okay,
yes, let's do it.
All right. So you have kids, right? So we'll make you the example.
Okay.
So when your girls were little, right? Pre-verbal,
yeah.
Talking real little, right? Toddlers and younger. When they were pre-verbal, when you would hand them something, would you say to them, and now you say thank you, even before they could talk, would you say that?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, of course, right? And it's because you wanted to teach your children to give gratitude by saying thank you when someone gave them something, right? And it's because of this thing that's part of the social contract called the rule of reciprocation. And the way social psychologists describe it in its most basic form is that you cannot take without giving in return, right? So, easy example, right? We start having that imprinted into us, and we're taught that from before we can even speak, right? It's the same reason why when you're walking down the street and a stranger walks by you and they say good morning, you say good morning back, right? And then the analogy that I like, and this ties into legendeering because it's one of the sort of building blocks of this strategy. One of the ways I like to describe it is, or another analogy I like to use is, we've all kind of been in a situation like this where we're out to dinner with a friend, get to the end of the meal, and the friend grabs the check and says, dinner's on me, right? And then you do the polite dance back and forth, right? You say, oh, come on, you don't have to do that. At least let me get the drinks, let me get the tip, right? And eventually you give in, right? And you don't just make one decision to give in, you actually make two decisions side by side. But a lot of people don't think of it that way because it all comes out of your mouth in sort of one sentence, right? So the first thing you say is, when you finally decide to give in, the first thing you say is, okay, fine, right? And that's your decision to accept the gift, right? But then the next thing out of your mouth in the same breath is, but the next one is on me.
Right.
Right? And that's your decision to reciprocate, because you literally can't help yourself. It's automatic. And it's not an obligation, right? It is something you look forward to.
Right.
In fact, like I know in my experience and other people that I've talked to about this, they'll say, we all sort of agree that not only do we want to return that favor, we actually look forward to it and we create opportunities to do it, right? Have you been in a situation where you've had something like that happen and then you have reached out to that person and said, hey, I'm taking you out to dinner next week, right? You've set it up and then gratefully and gladly taken them out to dinner and picked up the check at the end of the meal, right? And so the way I describe legendeering is like it's a very, it's a complicated strategy, but at the end of the day, essentially what it allows you to do is to buy dinner for your ideal audience, right? And then by branding the content that you're putting out through legendeering to your business, that's value-driven content, right? By branding it to your business, you provide them the opportunity to buy you dinner in return.
Yeah.
Right.
And I mean, it's very similar to what I'm doing here at the Michael Esposito Show, which is just trying to provide valuable content to our audience, and and it's presented by DenTen, as we've talked about.
Right, and that's why I saw, when we talked about the live show, that's why I saw that as a great opportunity to incorporate legendeering content, because it is all about delivering value to the community.
Yep.
It's a great way to do it.
And I feel like you've been coaching me on this for a long time, but I want to just give you a little throwback to when we first met, which I think is really fitting as we start to conclude this episode here, is that we first met at networking events, and we started talking. And I don't remember exactly how the conversation went down that path that you're talking about, but it did. I remember, I think we were at a Gab meeting, and I was telling you, hey, Tom, I want to start this podcast. And there's a few people that played a big role in me starting my podcast. At the time, it wasn't the iHeart podcast that we're on today. And nor did I think it would get to this level. But, like Merritt and I talk about it, where she helped me start making action to start doing things. And I remember when you and I first met, I started like picking your brain. And I was like, hey, I want to start this podcast. What do you think? And I forgot what kind of value I provided you, but for some reason, and maybe you can remind me, for some reason you came to me at that event and said, hey, I want to help you now. And I don't know if it was I did something for you with insurance or something. I forget what it was, what triggered that for you, but I remember you saying that to me. And you actually made time to meet with me. We met at Crafted Cup in Poughkeepsie.
Yep.
And you made time to meet with me for close to an hour and sit there with a notebook and take notes and share your ideas with me about what a podcast can look like, questions I could ask guests, and with nothing in return. Like, there was no idea that I can afford your services or anything like that. You just spent that time, and I have something here today that you had recommended to me, which I also think is really important, that when someone's going to spend time with you to share their knowledge for free, even though it's somewhat reciprocal, that you kind of listen to them. And I remember you said to me, why don't you just pick up a Zoom H4 recorder and just put it on the table and start your podcast that way, Michael? And I was like, cool. Amazon, Zoom H4 recorder, boom. And I bought it. I have it here with us in studio today. And that's because of you, Tom, and the time that you spent with me. And then, our relationship evolved from there. But what I want to share that with is that your legendeering strategy that you've developed over the past maybe year or so now has been something you've been living by for years, because we're talking 4 years ago, I think, that we sat down in that coffee shop.
Yeah, I think it was probably more like 3+, somewhere in that neighborhood. Yeah. But I was still at that point, I was kind of dipping my toe into sort of creating Talex and turning it into the company that I hope it's going to become. But yeah, I was still doing some work in production at the time. I was still doing some commercial shoot. I had kind of pulled back, so I had limited my role in production to just, I had stepped away from show running and series producing, and I was just working as a director of photography, or DP, at that point. But I hadn't fully committed to sort of entrepreneurship yet at that stage. But I was starting to kind of like test the waters a little bit. And I don't know what it was, because I didn't have business insurance through or with you yet.
Right.
I did end up buying business
Right,
insurance
later on, yeah.
through you.
That's how I know how much your equipment cost.
Yeah.
I remember that. I was like,
Yeah.
whoa, mind blown.
Yeah, it would cost more now. That figure has gone up. But yeah, so...
But I just remember that you had said, let me spend some time with you and share with you. I forget why. But
I think you had connected me to a couple of people. I think you had made some introductions. I think that's what it was. I think you had connected me with a few. Because when we met, I was actually very new to networking.
Yes.
And I think you made some introductions. You invited me to a Toastmasters meeting. So yeah, I think that's what it was. I think you had sort of said, hey, I'm happy to help you out. You had been doing networking for like longer than I had, because at that point it was
months.
Like, yeah, but you knew people locally because you had worked locally.
Well, you and
I
we connect very quickly with people, and I think that goes back to why we kind of like put a pin in the relationship thing, is that we can go on for hours on that, because you and I connect very quickly, and I think it has to do with, again, along the line of legendeering, along the line of creating value and thinking of the end user or customer or audience, is that we just want to listen to somebody. You meet somebody, and a lot of times they want to tell you, a lot of times people are inclined when they meet somebody to tell them all about themselves.
Right.
Rather than say, hi, nice to meet you, tell me about you. And as they do, listening. I had an interaction yesterday, wonderful interaction. However, as the guy asked me something about myself, why I was doing what I was doing, I started sharing with him, and immediately, no fault of, I don't put any blame on him or want to put shade on him at all, but immediately stopped, and he started telling me about himself. And I was like, okay, cool. And I think that that's a big mistake, because you don't get to learn about the other person. You don't get to establish that relationship. And for you got to learn I wanted to do a podcast.
Yeah.
And you listened to that story, and you were able to provide value. And then I, in turn, listened to your story and how you could provide value. And here we are today in a legit studio at iHeart with professional gear and everything. We got our H4 on the table here, but
yeah, for nostalgia.
Look at this. This is this has a lot to do with people like yourself.
I'm happy to hear that. My goal in pretty much everything I do is for everybody to walk away from it feeling like they gained for the experience, and just enjoyed it, right? And so, yeah, if I can help in any small way, I tell people all the time to think of me as a resource and reach out if they have questions. If I can ever help. I got a call on the way here from somebody who's got a family member who's curious, doesn't really have any budget to speak of to create any content, but curious about kind of getting themselves started and what they can do on their own. And I said, go on my website, use the link, book some time. I'll help if I can. I'll help however I can. So yeah, that's just sort of how I like to do things.
That's awesome. I was thinking about, like, do I have any big stumpers for Tom? And I don't have any big questions for you. But I did take a note here that you do like to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you. And as we conclude this show, I'd like to know, one, what that means to you, and who is the smartest person around Tom today?
So I like to surround myself with people who are smarter than me, and kind of what I mean by that in like, if you want to drill down into it a little bit, is people who are better at things that I'm not good at, right? Okay. Better than me at things that I don't have skills in, right? Mm-hmm. People who complement my skill set with their skill set. And so, yeah, I mean, that takes all kinds of shapes and forms. I think probably the one person who I would single out right now in my life is a guy, Dominic Damaski, who's the guy who I co-host my Clubhouse room with every week. And we've actually never met in person. He lives in Pittsburgh, or near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We got connected at the beginning of the pandemic by a mutual friend who was kind of hosting a Zoom get together for a bunch of guys, and just kind of hit it off from there. And yeah, I mean, every week, he's the one that brought me into Clubhouse. He's the one that sort of opened up that space for me. He's the one that invited me to be a co-host of that room with him. And we had a third co-host who's since moved on. So now it's Dom and I every week hosting that space and kind of leading the discussion in that room. And yeah, I learn something from him every time. He likes to say every week almost, he says he's there riding my coattails, but the opposite is actually true. He's the one that's created that space and engendered this sense of community that has started to develop there. So yeah, right now it's probably Dom.
That's such a cool mutual respect that the two of you had. I just have to share, I think most of our business leaders out there and entrepreneurs know about it. I mean, Henry Ford talked about that a lot. And I mean, if you're looking to enter a different career or in your career, level up in your career, or start an entrepreneurship journey, you got to find the people that can complement your weaknesses. They're what's gonna help you level up and get to that next place. And I think it's gonna also help you with the naysayers, where they say, well, Michael, I'll use myself as the example. Michael, you're not good with numbers. Yeah, I'm not. That's why I hired Trivium Point. That's why I hired a financial team to help me with numbers. So I think that's such a great thing. We're gonna have to get Dominic on the show.
You have to do it remotely because he's in Pittsburgh.
Well, we'll do it remote. We've done that before. Can you share with our audience this clubhouse room that you have, how they can find it? Because I'm sure it's tremendous value.
Yeah. So every Wednesday morning at 9:30 a.m., the room is called Clubhouse Podcasting, Publishing, and Social Media. So I was not involved in the naming of it, which may be good because it may make it easier for people to find. It's essentially a word salad of keywords. One of the former hosts is a marketer, and so he just basically named it using a word salad of keywords.
I love word salad of keywords.
So that's the name of the room. It's every Wednesday at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And what we do, in addition to that space being on Clubhouse, we also do a live stream of it. So that room is also, I kind of cracked the code on how to do that.
Oh, cool.
So we live stream that show on Facebook or that time. I don't even call it a show. Somebody called it a show to me the other day, and I was like, that term doesn't feel right to me because it's a Clubhouse room. But we live stream that conversation on Facebook, on YouTube, on LinkedIn,
cool.
On Twitter, and on Twitch.
Cool.
Every week.
Awesome.
So there's a whole bunch of outlets, whole bunch of places where you can find it. Dominic's company is called Motivation Champs. So if you search at Motivation Champs, is his business, or if you search at Talex Media LLC, you can find that live stream if you want to check that out. And if you want to join us on Clubhouse, then the more the merrier.
Awesome. And you mentioned your social media handles before, but just say them again.
Yeah, here's a little tip for people, right?
I love this.
If you're going to start a business, right, and you're gonna pick the same social media handle on all of your social media channels
and make it fit.
Because
some of them don't fit, so then make it fit on all of them.
Right. And so what I did was Talex Media was taken, I think on Facebook or I forget where. I couldn't find the company. Like it was a page with like one like or something. It was really weird. But I couldn't use it as a handle. And so I threw the LLC on the end of it.
Maybe you created it back in 2006 and you didn't remember.
Yeah, right. But I don't even think I was on Facebook back then. But yeah, so I just added the LLC, and then I found that was available everywhere. And so every social, and like everything from TikTok to Twitter to Twitch to YouTube to Facebook to Instagram to LinkedIn, everything is at Talex Media LLC. So if you just throw that handle into Google, the whole page
comes up.
Is all of my social media stuff. And it's just because it's the same handle for everything.
Very cool.
Right? So like easy way to direct people to your content is to use the exact same handle on every platform.
Cool. And you reminded me that you also do have a podcast, Something
I do.
Good.
Yeah, it's called Something Good. It has been in stasis for a while. So we did, I did 55 episodes of it. So there's 55 episodes out currently. And you can find that on all the major podcast platforms. You can find it on iHeart. You can get it on, Stitcher and Apple Podcasts and Google Play and Spotify and all them.
Cool little 20-minute episodes.
Yeah, short episodes. The tagline of the podcast is, it's a bite-sized podcast about anything and everything good for goodness sake.
Love that.
And so, it's a short, easily digestible, quick little podcast that I did 55 episodes of. I have plans to resurrect it. I just have to find the time. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. I want to keep doing it. And you can find that on social media with searching at Some Good Pod.
Cool. Well, Tom, thank you so much for coming in today.
My pleasure.
Again, for me to have friends come in like yourself, to learn more about my friends. Like, I knew that you were Emmy nominated, but I didn't know about all this other stuff. And then you were House Hunters International. I've definitely caught myself in a House Hunter International loop of watching those. And you're behind the scenes there. So cool to learn so much more about you, your story, the value you offer to our community, the value you've offered me is just tremendous and so appreciated. And I'm looking forward to our project. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, me too.
Cool, man.
Next time we talk, maybe I'll tell you about the time I was in Alaska and I saw a bald eagle fighting a bear for a salmon.
And stop. Yes. Well, so you got to listen in then, people. All right. Thanks so much for coming in, Tom.
My pleasure, Mike. Thanks for
right.
having me. I appreciate it.
Cool. And that's a wrap.
Cool.